doing? My leg! No! Pussy! No.
And that we have reached the final part of this little mini-series. We went from tank to DPS, and now the support category. I'm gonna be honest, I've been kind of lacking on making this video for mainly one reason and one reason alone. I don't like support in this game. I think support is the most uninteresting, boring-ass role in this entire roster because support is the easiest role to play. All you gotta do with support is sit your ass in the backline, heal your teammates, make call-outs when you're getting dove, and just not die. Like, it's not that hard to play support, especially with how many overtuned changes they've made to every one of them at some point. Like, gee, does Cloak and Dagger need another fucking buff? But I'm not GS rated. You didn't come here to hear me rant about support being dog shit. No, you came here because I actually have some concepts for supports. Funny enough, despite me disliking playing support, I think that this is probably the most interesting category on the entire video list because I actively tried to avoid adding main healers to this category. I think support in Rivals is way more fun if there is less main healers and a lot more niche options for support. If you haven't seen my original tank or DPS videos, I highly recommend you go watch those. They're super good. Anyway, with that being said, let's get to it. As tradition, we're going to start this list off with one of my all-time favorite Marvel characters and one that's always been talked about already, the Silver Surfer. Norton Rad needs zero introduction. The most iconic creation of Jack Kirby and all-around cool dude. Surfer being in support may seem a bit weird given the nature of his powers, but Surfer in character is a pacifist. He prefers not to throw down unless he absolutely has to, making him fit that role perfectly. Since dodging fights as much as possible with support is pretty important. He also would be another flying support, so that's neat. Surfer would fly around with his board, which would have a pretty similar mobility curve to that of Ultron. A cool idea for an ability would be for Surfer to face through his board and appear under it, referring to that scene from Rise of the Surfer. But I guess if he did have to fight, he would utilize the power Cosmic. And to keep it simple, super duper space magic. You can basically make him do anything you really want with this power, and it also gives him cosmic awareness of his surroundings, which could make for a good passive. Some fun team-up ideas could be him giving this power to Adam Warlock, where Adam can tether an ally and an enemy together, and if the enemy does damage to the tethered target, they take the damage as well. This could be a good way to deter divers and force them to disengage who they're diving. And another team-up I saw someone give the idea for, and I want to share this one because it's fucking cool. It's with Thor, and it's called Ride the Lightning. When Thor throws his hammer, the Surfer can dive towards it, slamming down in an area that leaves a small cosmic storm that slows enemies and heals allies. But for his primary, he'll fire a straight beam of energy that will damage enemies and heal allies. I know I just talked about main healer syndrome, but Surfer feels like the most fitting for that role, especially since he cares about all life in the universe. So simple defensive abilities could be him flying to an ally and absorbing incoming projectiles for a brief moment. Just like in Rise of the Surfer. A lot of inspiration from that movie, by the way. Another ability I would give him would be similar in nature to his healing. Basically, Surfer throws a small singularity forward, which can either stick to an enemy or roll freely on the ground. This orb would absorb all incoming damage for a brief moment before exploding, dealing a certain amount of damage and healing allies, depending on how big the star is. With all this defense, he seems to not have a lot of offensive options, which is where his ult comes in. Surfer would fire a beam at an enemy that would constantly fill them with the power of Cosmic, so long as he is in their line of sight or doesn't die, creating a ball of energy around the enemy that damages them if they get too close, and as long as the Surfer is in the enemy's LOS, the energy will build up until eventually it breaks, or he dies, or it reaches its limit, and all that energy collapses onto that poor specimen, exploding in a massive area, a final wish, if you will. Now that we got the predictable pick out of the way, I think it's time that we move on to much more obscure character, Red Skull. Yep. I understand some people may be a bit uncomfy about Skeletor here for very obvious reasons, but I find those people to be pretty whiny about the topic. Though I will say, Tank might be more fitting for a man like the Red Skull, but this is a guy who's more than likely to hide in the back lines while he lets everyone else do the fighting for him, just like a support. And just like a support player, he'd expect you to do everything, with a few words of encouragement, giving a direct order to push forward, giving your teammates damage reduction in an area around him. But as a wise man once said, the circle of life starts and ends with a revolver, a German Luger specifically. Not a complicated sidearm, but it's sure as hell effective. But it isn't the Red Skull without two of his most iconic pieces of paraphernalia, the Cosmic Cube and the Dust of Death. The Dust of Death is a gas that causes the victim's skin to shrivel up around their skull and discolors it to a red hue, or in this case, a gas grenade that, when thrown, leaks this gas out, damaging enemies and allies in a small area. We do a little trolling with this one, but once the gas is all used up, all allies who lose health from it would gain temporary overhealth. And lastly, the Cosmic Cube, which would do two things, contributing to his third ability, where he uses the cube to speed up his teammates' movement speed and firing speed, again in a small area around him, and for his ultimate, he'd utilize the full power of the Cosmic Cube, creating a massive burst of energy like the Eye of Agamotto. Enemies that are hit by it, this will have their character model shouted across 12 dimensions, only being healed by 1/12 of the heals they would normally get. Alright, I can't fit this anywhere in this section here, but having a passive that does 50% more damage to mutants is some crazy ass work. I love the internet, man. Also, I think it would be funny if he had a team up with Cap and Bucky that gives them both immunity damage to the Death Dust. Talk about an uneasy and awkward ass alliance. Perhaps even a deadly alliance. Ayo! There have been a lot of mutants added to Rivals already. Like, Jesus, besides season 1 and 4, every other season has had a mutant of some kind. And season 5 is going to be Rogue and Gambit as its main heroes. So, yeah, there are a lot of X-Men. I'm going to add to that with Jubilee. For those who X-Men, Jubilee is a bizarre choice for support, since her powers revolve around creating kinetic explosions in the form of fireworks. But that's why I went for the support route with her. Burst Healing. Take that one chick from Big Hero 6, Baptiste's Burst Healing, and the Balloon Blast Bros move from Mario and Luigi, stick them in a blender and you get quite a unique support with insane burst healing potential, creating balls of kinetic energy that can damage enemies and heal allies, along with pushing them back slightly with a burst. Maybe for the design you could go with a marine biologist angle, with beach balls and waves of glitter, leading to her two abilities, Beach Ball Blitz and Bath Bomb. For the former, Jubilee would create a giant bubble in the shape of a beach ball. It leaves her vulnerable as it charges, but the more it charges, the bigger the ball gets. Once thrown, it will explode on contact with an enemy or ally, healing in an area equal to the beach ball's size. And for her second ability, Jubilee would wave her hands forward as she creates a wave of glitter and fireworks. This wave would push back damage and slow enemies slightly, like Sue's Psionic Burst. And for her ultimate, I like the concept of Jubilee vaulting forward as she manifests her kinetic powers around her body, jumping around as she releases more and more fireworks from her body, until the final one where she causes a massive explosion in an area. TLDR, we turn her into my goat, Firecracken from Swap Force. I think for team-ups, you'd have to do something with Wolverine, and I think the scariest option is giving him a kinetic energy fishnet that lets him scoop up people in a bigger area and drags them right in front of where he's gonna dive. Wolverine already has some really stupid team-ups, so this is just falling in line with that. If there's one thing I despise more than grannies, it's without a doubt triple support. I fucking hate triple support, and I think whoever does it needs to be hung by jumper cable. We need an anti-healer. Originally, I was gonna pick Scorpion, but I thought there might be a better option. Lo and behold, Omega Red, one of the more niche X-Men villains. Omega Red's whole gimmick was to be an anti-healing factor. His mutant powers let him bypass generation of certain mutants, like Wolverine, which he would have a passive based around, like Blades, if it was actually good. If that's the case, why support them? Because the other part of his powers, Omega Red can steal the life essence of those with the X genes and heal himself, all through his Carbonadian tendrils. Omega Red would fire a tendril forwards which he would stick into any close enough enemies, draining the health from them over a short period of time and storing it in a meter under his crosshair. He then could stick this tendril into a teammate, letting him deposit the health into allies. But what if he and or another ally get dove during this process? Well, then he could disperse a cloud of spores. Yeah, that's another thing he can do for some reason. Just don't question it, it's Marvel. This spore cloud, however, would be damning to any enemy caught in the radius, as it would block healing outright, maybe even giving damage reduction to allies. And for his ultimate, he would form an Omega symbol with his tendrils and fire a beam that would drain the health of anyone in front of it, along with preventing overhealth. This would give a very much needed thing for this game, which is an Ana. Ana is pretty much the balancer of Overwatch, so Omega Red could fill a very similar role to that. Okay. One more X-Men. I promise you. Just one more. Domino. Domino is another example of more fitting into the duelist category rather than the support one, but I feel that her luck powers would fit better into that role than the former, like giving her passive luck hacks to teammates around her for higher critical hit potentials with her weapons, or in this case, weapon, a 50 caliber Desert Eagle. It would have a slow fire rate, but it would hit like a truck. A fitting weapon for crit maxing. I should know, but this isn't what makes Domino's luck strong. It's her ability to avoid oncoming damage, and the easiest way to do this is with a dashing leap. Similar to Star-Lord, this leap would allow Domino to avoid incoming damage by making her intangible. But I said she was a support, so giving her a way of healing would probably be beneficial. And fitting into the off-healer category, how about a convenient health pack? Domino would just pull out a big health kit she can give to an ally. It's dumb, but very fitting. Just like her ultimate, where Domino would slow walk forward for 6 seconds. During this time, any projectiles or non-beam weapons would just repel away from Domino, though this would only apply to non-beam weapons to make it balance. Okay, I'm looking over my to-do list and quotas here, and it turns out we still have not made the quota of picking a character that fits more into the tank category for this video, so let me go ahead and get that one out of the way right now. Penance. Penance is probably the most obscure character in any of these videos. Penance was originally a hero named Speedball, a founding member of the New Warriors along with my Pookie Nova. Anyways, shit happens, New Warriors / Speedball fucks up, hundreds die, Registration Act happens, Civil War, resulting in the creation of his new persona, Penance, and a revamping of his powers. Penance can generate and absorb kinetic energy, letting him generate a powerful field around him or others, but with a caveat: he needs to feel physical pain. But even with that, it allows him to absorb energy from the likes of Dr. Doom and Nova. You can see where the tank idea comes from, but you can easily make him support as well, a very unique one. Since Penance's whole gimmick is taking his pain and turning it into energy, you can build his whole kit around that. In turn, he can convert all damage he's taken into overhealth for your allies, a cool passive and ability for him. It also make him very hard to dive, since diving him would just feed the passive meter under his bar and give him more fuel to the fire, including his primary, a small blast of energy that can pierce enemies and allies, giving slight overhealth to allies it pierces, making it slightly different from Invisible Woman's. Penance would also be able to release a quick burst of energy from his body around it, which would disperse attack animations and stop momentum, which you can make his ultimate very similar to that. Penance would release a massive burst of energy in a small area around him. Any incoming projectiles are absorbed into the blast and are turned into more energy from the explosion. All energy stored up by his passive is released and will increase the range and power of the said blast. Basically, he does that funny Vegeta clip. I've talked about a lot of space and cosmic heroes within these videos, so let's dial it back a bit with the Savage Lands King and Marvel's own Tarzan, Kaisar. Kaisar offers quite a unique take on support. His main gimmick would be using his brother Sabu to travel the field at high speeds to get the allies in need of help. Essentially, he'd be like a tank, but not really. Jesus, man, I need to fucking just make an honorable mentions list at this point. One of his abilities would be sending Sabu out to body block hits and swipe away any incoming enemies. And Kaisar himself would fight using a trusty hunter's knife, slashing in an area in front of him just like Blade. For a secondary ability, Kaisar could throw one of 2 healing boluses that, when thrown, sweeps the ground forward until it hits something. If it hits an ally, it heals them for a burst of single target healing. Or if it hits an enemy, it does light damage but slows them temporarily. Remember that whole niche thing I talked about at the beginning of this video? This is exactly what I mean. Helping the team without full-on heal botting. If you couldn't tell, Kaisar has a lot of primitive tools, but he also has some other modern stuff, specifically anti-metal spears. If Kaisar were to hit an enemy directly with these spears, all their shield health would be removed. And for an ultimate, Kaisar and Sabu would lunge forward similar to Wolverine, dashing forward in an area, causing enemies they hit to bleed over time, along with dropping healing herbs within said area to heal allies that they just so happen to dash past. And finally, saving the best for last, Falcon. Now, I know some people are going to say, wait, no Captain America stuff? Yes, because being honest, I don't like Captain Falcon. A lot of people don't. And I feel like giving him the shield isn't a necessary thing to make a moveset for him. Plus, Angela kinda does the whole shield tank thing a little too well. Besides, he already has a lot to work off of with just his Falcon kit, especially for a support role. I like the idea of him being a mix of flight and ground movement wise. Like, maybe instead of fully flying 24/7, he can have an ability that lets him fling himself backwards at an angle at high speeds to get away from danger, while also firing dual Uzis like an Ant-Man, letting him glide slowly through the air. But the Uzis wouldn't be his primary. For that, he would fling his crimson plumes forward in threes, dealing damage to enemies and healing allies. Perhaps you can also let him shield himself with his wings. Maybe as he takes damage, the plumes can fall to the ground around him, letting allies pick them up and heal themselves. His main gimmick, however, would be his Falcon drone, Redwing. I didn't know how I wanted to portray Redwing. Some versions have him as just a Falcon, others have him as a drone, like in the MCU. So I said, fuck it, Robobird. Similar to the Garlic drone from PvZ, Falcon can enter the perspective of his drone, Redwing, to gain an aerial viewpoint. Redwing would fire a burst of damage from a Gatling gun in his mouth, firing a barrage at anyone caught in the crossfire. And his secondary ability would let him mark a location with a flare before an airstrike of egg bombs rains down shortly after. Maybe you can also mark enemies on the map for your team. For Falcon's ultimate, it's gotta be a rider kick. That's it. That's the ability. It's just a rider kick. A rider kick that grants him half of his HP and overhealth, and allows him to drop his feathers down that can heal targets. A bit of an anticlimactic end to this video, but that's just what I do with these videos. I come in, I say what I have to say, I move on with my day. If you guys have any concepts for Marvel Rivals characters, please leave a comment down below. But with that, make sure to like, subscribe, and I will see you all in the next video. Goodbye.